Well, we'll begin tonight with some cheering news on the Nigerian economy. The International Monetary Fund has upgraded the country's economic growth forecast for 2025 to 3.9%. That's a 0.5 percentage point increase from the earlier projection. The fund attributes the improved outlook to stronger macroeconomic stability, rising investor confidence, and increased oil output. Well, the outward revision is in the IMF's latest World Economic Outlook report presented at the ongoing World Bank IMF annual meetings in Washington. There is even a brighter projection for 2026 to further strengthen to 4.2 percentage point, reflecting a 0.9 percentage point improvement from its previous forecast. The revision reflects reduced domestic uncertainty and Nigeria's limited exposure to the new tariffs imposed by the United States, which have had minimal impact due to the country's modest trade links with the U.S. According to the IMF, the Nigerian economy has shown notable resilience. In recent months, the exchange rate has appreciated and investor sentiment has strengthened since July. From its latest World Economic Outlook report, the IMF says global economic growth will slow to 3.2% in 2025 from 3.3% last year. Growth is projected to fall to 3.1% in 2026. And joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Arise News business correspondent Rotus Odiri. Hello, Rotus. Thank you for being on Newsnight. Well, let me begin by...
Great to be with you and great to be with all our Arise News viewers.
Great. I mean, cheering news for the Nigerian economy and for the administration that has repeatedly said that the economy is turning the corner, turning the bend. But let me ask you, what are the triggers behind the lower global forecasts by the IMF?
Yeah, you can see, fragmentation, right? Where different regions have different growth stories. So for Nigeria, it's encouraging, but for the globe, it's less encouraging because of mainly supply chain disruptions and this tariff overhang. So a perfect example with supply chain disruptions is China. Last Thursday, China announced new restrictions on rare earth mineral exports because they control about 70% of output. And for our viewers, rare earth minerals go into, this mobile phone I'm using here to be able to speak with you, our camera equipment, vehicles, semiconductors, chips, and so on and so forth, fighter jets and so on. That led to Donald Trump announcing 100% tariffs on Chinese goods. He backed off on that effective November 1st, but the U.S. market lost about $2 trillion on Friday. He's backed off from that, but now China has now announced some restrictions on ships coming from the U.S., which are made by South Korea. So look, all of that, plus a weaker U.S. labor market, a weaker U.K. labor market, all of these things are, mushrooming into the IMF outlook for growth for 2025 and for 2026. And this also, higher interest rates, inflation, but it's mostly supply chain disruptions and the fear of tariffs. Because look, they did say in their update today that the impact on tariffs is muted, but that's because you had, this. Remember the taco? Trump always chickens out. He would announce something, then back off. So the U.S. was very stop, start with the tariff announcements, and then a lot of businesses front-loaded their orders. So you had a lot of businesses that were importing things quickly to beat the tariff. So that's the reason why you haven't seen the impact. Those inventories are going to come down at some point. And when they do, they will have to pass on the cost to consumers at the final end of the value chain. And that is going to have an inflationary impact. So that is still expected in the second half of this year, and that's going to bleed into 2026. So that's essentially what we're seeing and what informed the IMF's less optimistic outlook for global growth.
Great, and so I think that countries will then be building shocks against, building resistance against those shocks. But let me ask you before you go very briefly, Rotus, the priorities for the African countries at this meeting taking place in D.C. I know Cardoso, the CBN governor, is leading Nigeria's delegation to the meetings.
That's correct. For Africa, it's self-interest. The IMF had just concluded meetings with Kenya last week. Those meetings are going to continue into this week. Kenya had I think it's a 3.6 billion credit allotment from the IMF that expired early this year. They want to get another one. Ghana, as we all know, who defaulted on their loans, got assistance from the IMF. They're looking for another $385 million disbursement. Those meetings will continue this week as well. So it's really about concessional loans, concessional financing from the African delegation, reducing debt, getting a louder voice in terms of getting a louder voice for Africa at the table with the IMF. Nigeria. I mean, last year we asked the IMF if Nigeria had approached them for a loan. They said no, even though we qualify in billions based on the reforms that have been enacted. But so for Nigeria, it's just a further discussion on cooperation, regional cooperation, and so on. And as we've said, Governor Cardoso is leading that delegation here. And there's a press conference on Friday, I think, that we'll be attending as well.
Very much. Roches Odiri on the ground for us at the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C. Much appreciated.